What if I told you that every significant scientific discovery of the last century was already known by ancient civilizations thousands of years ago? What if the separation between science and spirituality is the greatest lie ever told to humanity? What if our world seems to be falling apart, and we've forgotten the fundamental laws governing consciousness and the cosmos? In the next 30 minutes, I will reveal how ancient wisdom traditions possessed scientific knowledge that we're only now rediscovering through our most advanced instruments. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Einstein spent his final years studying Sanskrit texts, why Tesla credited ancient Vedic knowledge for his most incredible inventions, and how the merger of ancient wisdom and modern science is creating a new paradigm that will transform everything we thought we knew about reality. This isn't about choosing between science and spirituality. It's about recognizing that they were never separate in the first place. The greatest minds in history understood this unity. Now it's time for you to understand it too. The Great Separation, how we lost our way. To understand the profound significance of ancient wisdom meeting modern science, we first need to know how they became separated in the first place. This separation wasn't natural. It was artificially created through a series of historical events that fundamentally altered humanity's relationship with knowledge. For thousands of years, the greatest minds of human civilization understood that the study of the physical world and the exploration of consciousness were inseparable aspects of the same inquiry. Ancient Egyptian priests were simultaneously mathematicians, astronomers, physicians, and mystics. Greek philosophers like Pythagoras and Plato saw no distinction between mathematical and spiritual truths. Medieval Islamic scholars advanced scientific knowledge and mystical understanding as complementary paths to the same ultimate reality. This unity began to fracture during the European Enlightenment, when the scientific method became a powerful tool for understanding the physical world. While this development brought tremendous advances in technology and medicine, it also created an artificial division between objective and subjective reality, matter and consciousness, and between the measurable and the meaningful. The final blow came with the rise of materialist philosophy in the 19th century, which declared that consciousness was merely an epiphenomenon of brain activity, and that spiritual experiences were nothing more than psychological delusions. This worldview became so dominant that even today, most people assume that science and spirituality are fundamentally incompatible. But something extraordinary has been happening over the last century. As science has probed deeper into the nature of reality, it has begun to rediscover truths that ancient wisdom traditions have preserved for millennia. The more we learn about quantum mechanics, consciousness research, and the fundamental structure of the universe, the more we realize that the ancients weren't primitive superstitionists. They were sophisticated explorers of reality who developed technologies of consciousness that we're only now beginning to understand. The quantum revolution, science meets mysticism. The first significant crack in the materialist worldview came with the development of quantum mechanics in the early 20th century. When physicists began studying the behavior of subatomic particles, they discovered phenomena that seemed to violate everything we thought we knew about the nature of reality. Particles could exist in multiple states simultaneously until observed. The act of measurement influenced the behavior of particles instantaneously across vast distances. The fundamental building blocks of matter appeared to be not solid objects, but probability waves, mathematical descriptions of potential realities. These discoveries were so shocking that many of the founders of quantum mechanics turned to ancient mystical traditions for guidance in understanding what they had uncovered. Werner Heisenberg, who formulated the uncertainty principle, studied Indian philosophy and found remarkable parallels between quantum mechanics and Vedantic teachings about the nature of reality. Niels Bohr, who developed the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, was so influenced by Eastern philosophy that he chose the yin-yang symbol as his family coat of arms. Recognizing that the complementarity principle in quantum mechanics was identical to the ancient Taoist understanding of the dynamic balance between opposing forces. Erwin Schrödinger, who formulated the wave equation that describes quantum systems, was deeply influenced by the Upanishads and wrote extensively about the connections between quantum mechanics and Vedantic philosophy. He famously declared that the plurality that we perceive is only an appearance. It is not real. A statement that could have come directly from an ancient Sanskrit text. These pioneers of quantum physics weren't just drawing superficial parallels between science and mysticism. They recognized that quantum mechanics had revealed the same fundamental truths about reality that mystics had been teaching for thousands of years. That consciousness and matter are intimately connected, that the observer and the observed are not separate, and that the ultimate nature of reality transcends our ordinary concepts of space, time, and causation. Ancient technologies of consciousness. While modern science struggled to understand the implications of quantum mechanics, ancient wisdom traditions had already developed sophisticated technologies for working with consciousness and its relationship to physical reality. These weren't primitive beliefs or philosophical speculations. They were practical methodologies based on thousands of years of systematic investigation into the nature of the mind and cosmos. The ancient Egyptian mystery schools developed precise techniques for mental transmutation, the ability to consciously alter one's state of consciousness to influence physical reality. Their understanding of the relationship between mind and matter was so advanced that they could perform what appeared to be miraculous healings and manifestations. The Hermetic tradition, which emerged from these Egyptian teachings, codified 7 fundamental principles that describe how consciousness creates and shapes reality. These principles, mentalism, correspondence, vibration, polarity, rhythm, cause and effect, and gender, provide a complete framework for understanding the mechanics of reality creation that modern quantum physics is only beginning to validate. Ancient Indian traditions developed equally sophisticated understandings of consciousness and its creative power. Maya is often mistranslated as an illusion, which refers to consciousness's creative power to manifest apparent multiplicity from fundamental unity. This understanding is remarkably similar to modern quantum field theory, which describes how all particles and forces emerge from fluctuations in underlying quantum fields. The Vedic tradition also developed precise technologies for accessing what they called Akasha, the pure consciousness field containing all information and potential. Modern physicists are now discovering similar concepts in their theories of the quantum vacuum and the holographic principle, which suggests that all information in the universe is encoded in its boundary. Chinese Taoist masters understood the fundamental principle of complementarity thousands of years before quantum physicists discovered wave-particle duality. Their concept of yin and yang describes the same dynamic relationship between opposing aspects of reality that Niels Bohr formalized in his complementarity principle. These ancient traditions weren't just philosophical systems. They were practical sciences of consciousness that enabled their practitioners to access extraordinary states of awareness and demonstrate remarkable abilities. The fact that modern science is now validating their fundamental insights suggests that we're witnessing the reunion of 2 aspects of human knowledge that should never have been separated. The consciousness revolution in modern science. While quantum physics opened the door to understanding the role of consciousness in physical reality, recent developments in neuroscience, psychology, and consciousness research have begun to validate many other aspects of ancient wisdom traditions. Research into neuroplasticity has shown that consciousness can reshape the brain through focused intention and practice. This validates ancient teachings about the power of meditation, visualization, and mental training to transform both mind and body. Studies of experienced meditators show dramatic changes in brain structure and function that correspond to the enhanced states of consciousness described in ancient texts. The field of psychoneuroimmunology has demonstrated that mental and emotional states directly influence immune function, hormone production, and genetic expression. This scientific validation of the mind-body connection confirms what ancient healing traditions have always known: that consciousness is the primary factor in health and disease. Research into the placebo effect has revealed that belief and expectation can create measurable physiological changes even when no active treatment is administered. This phenomenon, which mainstream medicine once dismissed as a nuisance to be controlled for, is now recognized as a powerful demonstration of consciousness affecting physical reality. Studies of near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, and other anomalous states of consciousness have provided scientific evidence for phenomena that ancient traditions have long described. While these experiences don't fit easily into materialist frameworks, they're consistent with ancient teachings about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to the physical body. The emerging field of quantum biology has discovered that quantum effects play crucial roles in biological processes like photosynthesis, enzyme function, and possibly even consciousness. This suggests that the quantum principles discovered in physics laboratories are fundamental to life, validating ancient teachings about the quantum nature of consciousness and biology. The holographic universe. Ancient wisdom meets cutting-edge physics. One of the most remarkable convergences between ancient wisdom and modern science is the holographic principle. The idea that all the information in a volume of space can be encoded on its boundary. This principle, which emerged from black holes and string theory studies, has profound implications for our understanding of consciousness and reality. The holographic principle suggests that our three-dimensional reality might be a projection from information encoded on a two-dimensional surface, much like a hologram. This idea resembles ancient teachings about the illusory nature of physical reality and the fundamental role of information or consciousness in creating apparent form. Ancient Hindu and Buddhist traditions taught that the phenomenal world is a projection of consciousness, with individual minds being localized expressions of universal consciousness. The holographic principle provides a scientific framework for understanding how this might work. If consciousness is the fundamental field from which physical reality emerges, individual consciousness would be a localized projection of universal consciousness. The holographic model also explains many phenomena that have puzzled scientists, such as how memories are stored in the brain. Research has shown that memories aren't localized in specific brain regions, but are distributed throughout the neural network, much like information in a hologram. This validates ancient teachings about the non-local nature of consciousness and memory. Perhaps most significantly, the holographic principle suggests that every part of the universe contains information about the whole universe. This is remarkably similar to the ancient Hermetic principle of correspondence. As above, so below, which teaches that patterns at one level of reality are reflected at all other levels. If the holographic principle is correct, then individual consciousness isn't separate from universal consciousness, but is a localized expression. This would mean that by working with our consciousness, we can access information and influence patterns throughout the universe. Exactly what ancient wisdom traditions have always taught. The science of manifestation, quantum fields and consciousness. Modern physics has discovered that space is filled with quantum fields, invisible matrices of energy that give rise to all particles and forces. These fields respond to observation and measurement in ways that suggest consciousness plays a fundamental role in determining physical reality. This scientific understanding provides a framework for understanding how consciousness might influence physical reality through what ancient traditions called manifestation or reality creation. If consciousness can affect quantum fields, and quantum fields give rise to physical reality, then consciousness can indeed shape physical experience. Research into the observer effect has shown that the act of measurement or observation can influence the behavior of quantum systems. While this effect is most clearly demonstrated in laboratory conditions, its implications extend to all interactions between consciousness and physical reality. Studies of random number generators have shown that human intention can influence the output of quantum-based random systems. This research, conducted at prestigious institutions like Princeton University, provides scientific evidence for what ancient traditions called the power of focused intention to influence physical events. The Global Consciousness Project has demonstrated that collective human consciousness can influence random number generators worldwide during significant global events. This suggests that consciousness operates individually and collectively, creating fields of influence that can affect physical systems at a distance. These findings validate ancient teachings about the power of consciousness to influence reality through focused intention, emotional coherence, and spiritual practice. Modern science is beginning to understand what the ancients called magic or miracles, which are the natural results of consciousness operating according to quantum mechanical principles. Bridging ancient wisdom and modern medicine. The integration of ancient wisdom and modern science is most visible in medicine, where traditional healing practices are validated and enhanced by scientific research. Acupuncture, a practice based on ancient Chinese understanding of energy meridians in the body, has been shown to influence the nervous system, hormone production, and immune function in ways modern instruments can measure. While the exact mechanisms are still being studied, the therapeutic effects are well documented and widely accepted. Meditation practices developed by ancient traditions have been shown to produce measurable changes in brain structure and function, stress hormone levels, immune markers, and genetic expression. These changes correspond to the enhanced states of health and consciousness that ancient practitioners described. Ayurvedic medicine's understanding of constitutional types and the relationship between mind, body, and environment is validated by research into personalized medicine and the role of lifestyle factors in health and disease. Modern genomics is discovering that ancient Ayurvedic classifications correspond to genetic and physiological differences between individuals. Traditional herbal medicines are being studied and validated by modern pharmacology, with many ancient remedies proving to contain active compounds that work through well-understood biological mechanisms. This research reveals that ancient healers had a sophisticated understanding of plant chemistry and its effects on human physiology. The placebo effect, once dismissed by modern medicine, is now recognized as a powerful demonstration of the mind's ability to influence physical healing. This validates ancient teachings about the primary role of consciousness and belief in health and recovery. The emergence of integral science. As the convergence between ancient wisdom and modern science continues to accelerate, a new paradigm is emerging that integrates objective and subjective approaches to understanding reality. This integral approach recognizes that consciousness and matter, spirit and science, are complementary to a more complete understanding of existence. Integral science acknowledges that while the scientific method is robust for studying objective phenomena, it must be complemented by contemplative practices and subjective investigation to fully understand consciousness and its role in reality. This approach validates both the rigor of scientific methodology and the insights of meditative traditions. This emerging paradigm leads to new fields of study that bridge science and spirituality, such as consciousness research, transpersonal psychology, and integral medicine. These fields use scientific methods to study phenomena previously considered purely spiritual or mystical. The integral approach also recognizes that ancient wisdom traditions developed sophisticated methodologies for investigating consciousness and reality that complement modern scientific methods. Rather than dismissing these traditions as primitive or unscientific, integral science seeks to learn from them and integrate their insights with contemporary knowledge. This integration creates new possibilities for human development and understanding that neither ancient wisdom nor modern science could achieve alone. By combining the precision of scientific methodology with the depth of contemplative insight, we're developing a more complete understanding of reality and our place within it. The convergence of ancient wisdom and modern science isn't just an intellectual curiosity. It has profound practical implications for how we live and approach challenges in the contemporary world. Understanding reality's quantum nature and consciousness's role in shaping experience provides a scientific foundation for practices like meditation, visualization, and intention setting. These aren't just spiritual exercises, but practical technologies for working with the fundamental forces that govern reality. The validation of mind-body connections through scientific research provides a rational basis for holistic approaches to health that integrate physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual factors. This understanding is revolutionizing medicine and opening new possibilities for healing and wellness. Research into neuroplasticity and the power of consciousness to reshape the brain validates ancient teachings about the possibility of fundamental personal transformation through dedicated practice. This gives us the confidence to change limiting patterns and develop new capacities through conscious effort. The scientific understanding of collective consciousness and morphic fields provides a framework for understanding how individual transformation contributes to collective evolution. This validates ancient teachings about the interconnectedness of all life and our responsibility to contribute to the greater good. The integration of ancient wisdom and modern science also provides practical guidance for navigating the challenges of contemporary life while maintaining a spiritual perspective and purpose. It offers tools for finding meaning and direction in a rapidly changing world, while staying grounded in scientific understanding and spiritual wisdom. The future of human evolution. The convergence of ancient wisdom and modern science is not just changing our understanding of reality, it's catalyzing a new phase of human evolution. As we integrate the insights of both traditions, we're developing new capacities for consciousness, creativity, and connection that represent the next stage of human development. This evolution is happening on multiple levels simultaneously. Individually, people are developing enhanced abilities for self-awareness, emotional regulation, and conscious creation. Humanity is creating new communication, collaboration, and problem-solving forms that transcend traditional limitations. Integrating ancient wisdom and modern science also leads to new technologies that work with consciousness rather than matter. These technologies, including consciousness-based healing devices, intention amplification systems, and collective intelligence networks represent a fundamentally new approach to human enhancement and problem-solving. Perhaps most importantly, this integration is helping humanity rediscover its true nature and purpose. As we understand the deep connections between consciousness and the cosmos, we remember that we're not separate from the universe, but that the universe is becoming conscious of itself through our individual and collective awareness. This remembering catalyzes a transformation in human values and priorities, shifting from purely material concerns to a more balanced approach that honors existence's physical and spiritual dimensions. This shift is essential for addressing our global challenges and creating a sustainable and meaningful future for humanity. The convergence of ancient wisdom and modern science represents one of the most significant developments in human history. For the first time, we have both the scientific understanding and the contemplative insights necessary to comprehend the true nature of reality and our role within it. This convergence is not happening by accident. It's the result of humanity's evolutionary readiness to integrate these complementary approaches to knowledge. We're living at a unique moment when scientific and spiritual understanding has reached sufficient sophistication to recognize their fundamental unity. But this integration won't happen automatically. It requires conscious participation from individuals willing to bridge these traditionally separate knowledge domains. It requires scientists open to contemplative insights and spiritual practitioners who respect scientific rigor. Most importantly, we must embody this integration in our lives, using scientific understanding and spiritual wisdom to navigate our challenges and contribute to collective evolution. We must become living examples of the unity between ancient wisdom and modern science. The future of humanity depends on our ability to make this integration real and practical. The challenges we face, from climate change to social inequality to existential meaning, require both the precision of scientific analysis and the depth of spiritual wisdom. Your role in the Great Integration. As you've learned about the convergence of ancient wisdom and modern science, you've become part of a growing movement of people who recognize the fundamental unity of all knowledge. This recognition comes with both tremendous opportunity and profound responsibility. The opportunity is to participate in the most significant transformation in human understanding since the scientific revolution. By integrating ancient wisdom and modern science into your own life, you become a bridge between these traditions and a catalyst for their continued convergence. The responsibility is to use this integrated understanding to serve the highest good for all life. The power that comes from understanding reality's scientific and spiritual dimensions must be wielded with wisdom, compassion, and humility. Your integration journey begins with recognizing that you are both a scientific and a spiritual being. You are a biological organism governed by physical laws and a conscious entity capable of transcending those laws through awareness and intention. You are both a product of evolution and an agent of evolution. This recognition transforms how you approach every aspect of your life. Your health becomes a matter of integrating physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual factors. Your relationships become opportunities to explore the interconnectedness of consciousness. Your work becomes a way to contribute to the evolution of human understanding and capability. Most importantly, your very existence demonstrates that ancient wisdom and modern science are not separate but complementary aspects of a more complete understanding of reality. You show others that it's possible to be scientifically informed, spiritually aware, rationally grounded, and mystically open through your life. The convergence of ancient wisdom and modern science is not just an intellectual development. It's a lived reality you can embody and express. The question is not whether this integration is possible, but whether you're ready to make it real in your own life and share it with the world. The universe has been waiting for this moment of integration for thousands of years. Ancient wisdom keepers preserved their insights through the dark ages of ignorance and persecution. Modern scientists push the boundaries of knowledge despite ridicule and resistance. Now, their streams of understanding are finally converging, and you have the privilege of witnessing and participating in this historic reunion. The most significant discoveries are yet to come and will emerge from the marriage of ancient wisdom and modern science. The greatest healing technologies, the most profound insights into consciousness, and the most effective solutions to humanity's challenges will all arise from this integration. You are not just a witness to this convergence. You are a participant in it. Whenever you meditate with scientific understanding, apply spiritual principles with rational discernment, and bridge the gap between matter and consciousness in your own experience, you contribute to the great work of integration that transforms our world. If this vision of integration resonates with your most profound knowledge, if you feel called to bridge ancient wisdom and modern science in your life, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. We will continue exploring the cutting edge of this convergence, diving deeper into specific applications and advanced practices that emerge from this integration. Like this video, if it opens your eyes to the profound unity between ancient wisdom and modern science, share it with anyone ready to participate in human history's most significant intellectual and spiritual revolution. Together, we're not just learning about the convergence of wisdoms and science. We're living it, embodying it, and creating the future through our integrated understanding. The ancient wisdom keepers and modern scientists have done their part. Now it's your turn to carry this integration forward and help humanity remember the unity that was never lost, only temporarily forgotten. The question is, are you ready to be part of the solution?